Ciao e buongiorno. Hello and good morning. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Destroying Full Preterist Inconsistentism. And welcome to my show. Today is Friday. Thank you for joining me. It is going to be a very nice weekend here in my neck of the regions. And today I just wanted to talk as I'm cruising about a few different things. Nothing too deep on the scripture end, just some common sense type of stuff, and some stuff that you may be interested in hearing. Firstly, the IO view, it seems to be making progress. Some people would laugh and say, you only have 360 subscribers and get a couple hundred listeners to your videos, whatever. But it wasn't always like that, right? It was maybe 20 months ago when I started sharing these videos and became the sort of leading proponent for the view, when people were really kind of against it. I would get a lot of kickback. Probably had about when I created my channel, probably only had maybe a few dozen subscribers initially, and those were just people who liked my teaching and heard I had put up a channel. And then over the past year and a half, 20 months, whatever it's been, that has steadily increased, and now it's at about 360. And the cool thing is, over the last 1 to 2 months, I've gotten 50 subscribers, which can be probably attributed to a few things. The interview I did on Derek Lambert's show, which was really good, that got a lot of hits. And then, of course, with Matthew Simon's latest, work in the IO movement and sort of giving me some credit, that has helped, of course. But overall, it's just been kind of nice to see that my work and my efforts, because trust me, there's been a lot of effort here, right? I've put in a lot of time. There's times where I'm doing it in the car like this as I drive, just because I don't have a lot of free still time, I should say. And then there's times where I literally have to pound out one of these bozos, videos and critique the heck out of it. And that's painful, because you have to sit through the painful video that's probably 2 to 3 hours long. Then you have to critique the painful video, which ends up being probably 5 to 6 hours long. And then you got to listen to it all again while you're doing it. It's just, it's a lot of work. So it's nice to see that my efforts are not in vain, and that there are a lot of bright, intelligent, honest people out there. And you can just tell when a movement's kind of gaining momentum and picking up. I get emails all the time from people, and comments from new people that I've never heard of before that are getting it, and just cool stuff. So very excited about that. Let's see. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the notion, or the argument, or the objection, right? The weak objection, all right? That because Yahweh allowed strangers to join Israel in the Old Covenant, right? That earthly body that was Israel, under the law, strangers could join. They would have to become circumcised, whatever. They would join one of the tribes. Because that was a reality in the Old Covenant, then therefore these people think that it demands that is a reality in the New Covenant, right? Well, there's so many problems with that, all right? Now, obviously, when you have no arguments, all right, that seems like a good argument to go to, right? It's sort of like, well, this happened back then, so it's obvious that it's got to be happening now. No, all right? That's not how theories and things work, right? You have to have evidence for your theory. You can't just say, oh, well, I ate an apple 10 years ago, so chances are I'm going to eat an apple 10 years from now, okay? No, it doesn't work that way, all right? The bottom line is that the Old Testament, the Old Covenant arrangement where strangers could join Israel's Old Covenant, was a detail in this story. Yes, for sure. No IOer would ever deny that. No IOer rejects that. I love when people use that as an argument, almost as if IOers didn't know, they're these elementary level brain duds. They say, oh, well, I got you, because strangers could join Israel's Old Covenant. And then they quote a passage about strangers joining Israel's Old Covenant, right? And I'm sitting there scratching my head like, this guy can't be serious, right? Doesn't he realize that I've combed through the Bible extensively and diligently, and obviously I'm aware of this? So no iota denies that strangers could join Israel's old covenant, okay? Old covenant, all right? A covenant that's no longer around. A covenant that was centered upon the law, that passed away in AD 70, every jot and tittle, when the temple was finally thrown down and all that went away, right? Nobody denies that. But the key is that it's an old covenant. All right, now whether or not God allowed them in, which he did, does not affect the ironclad fact that God was still Israel's God. His chosen people were Israel. All right, he had a body of Israelites that he loved higher than all other people of the world, and that he favored more than all other people of the world. And just so happened he allowed strangers to join that body. But it wasn't as if that was the whole point of the story, as these bozos like to make it, right? They're like, well, that's the whole point. Look, there was a few strangers that joined way back then, so that gives us hope today, and now we can take the light to the nations, right? I mean, it's just stupid, just real stupid. So the point that I'm trying to get you guys to realize here is that the fact that the old covenant had strangers joining it really bears no weight upon the end of the story in the New Testament. The end of the story in the New Testament is just that. It's the end of the story. All right? This New Testament portion that we have, the last days letters, in my opinion, and I've been backing this up with boatloads of scriptural proof, by the way, is basically just a mission. That's all it is. It's not a new religion. It's not some new spiritual sky kingdom cult covenant arrangement that God made where you can now enter into covenant with the God of Israel by believing in Jesus, and then you just do nothing, right? You're in covenant, but you do nothing, right? What kind of covenant arrangement is that, right? Excuse me. The Israelites in the Old Covenant had to do so much. Are you even kidding me right now? Has anyone taken a look at these books, Deuteronomy, Exodus, Leviticus? Do you know what they had to do in that Old Covenant? That's why it was called a curse. That's why it was called bondage, okay? Because it was work. That's why in the beginning, when we're seeing this sort of foreshadowed with Adam, we see that he would toil and sweat, right? They would bring forth children for trouble, right? And that's basically the whole picture of the law, right? It was work. Do, right? And Jesus came and said, I would give them rest. Because they had been under the bondage of this law, death, curse, condemnation, ministry of death, ministry of condemnation for so long. But that's what the covenant was. That's what Yahweh's covenant was, right? And people like to say, oh, God never changes. He doesn't change, Susan. Well, the way that Christians have him doing things today, he changed more than anybody I've ever seen. He fully transitioned, right? Now, the covenant arrangement is nothing. It's nothing. It's just believe, do nothing. Believe, do nothing. You don't have any contractual obligations in this new covenant. You don't have to do anything. 99% of the people who think they're in this new covenant do absolutely nothing. They don't preach the gospel. They don't abide by the laws. They don't do anything, right? But yet they're in covenant with Yahweh, right? It just sounds kind of nice, right? What are they doing? They're just in this spiritual sky kingdom cult, telling people that they're in this spiritual sky kingdom cult, and telling other people that they should join them in this spiritual sky kingdom cult because it's cool. It's really cool to be in it. But that's just dumb, okay? The New Testament last days is a mission that was going out to seal the elect on the forehead with the Holy Spirit as they waited for the Savior to come for them. It was a mission that was urgent and imminent in those last days, and it was a mission that Jesus said had to go to all nations before the end of the Old Covenant took place, which was the coming of the Lord and the destruction of the temple and the end of that whole entire Jewish Israel law system. All right? They weren't going out telling pagans, hey, the end of the law is coming, the end of the old covenant is coming, be saved, right? No, they were going out and telling Israelites who were so far dead in trespasses and sins because they were scattered out into the nations, worshiping the work of men's hands, wood and stone, in fulfillment of what Moses said in the beginning, when he said in Deuteronomy 4 that in the latter days the Israelites would be scattered all throughout the nations, right? And they would be worshiping these idols and work of men's hands, and they would be basically ignoring and rejecting the laws of their God, Yahweh, which of course was a curse. Moses told them, be very careful and diligent to do all these things that I'm setting before you today, otherwise you'll be cursed. And so here they are in the final last days, fulfilling what Moses said about how they'd be pagan and all throughout the nations, doing weird things and worshiping false gods. And, but God would turn, Moses says, and he would have mercy upon them, right? And why would he have mercy upon them? Well, Moses says in Deuteronomy 4, he says, he will turn and have mercy upon you and remember the covenant that he made with your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what do we see Paul doing? This is exactly what Paul is doing. He's fulfilling that statement. He's out in Galatia. He's telling them, hey, it doesn't matter if you guys are Jew or Greek, right? It doesn't matter what religious affiliation or cultural affiliation life has taken you, whatever that may be. If you are Christ, it's because you're Abraham's seed and an heir according to the promise. So God is remembering the promise that he made to the fathers, and he's having mercy on these Israelites out in the nations. Exactly what Moses said would take place. Here is Paul doing that, fulfilling that, showing that God was having mercy upon them. Might I remind you of Romans chapter 9, where he says, is God also having mercy upon the nations or upon the Gentiles? Then he quotes all these passages about old covenant scattered Israelites out in the nations. But that is precisely in fulfillment of these promises back in the Old Testament. God will have mercy upon you and remember the covenant that he made with your fathers while you're out in the nations, scattered, paganized, and doing all sorts of weird shite. And that is precisely what we're seeing taking place in the New Testament. People are just ignorant of the Old, so they have no clue. All right, but the point is that this was a mission. This was not a new religion. This was not a new covenant that was going to kind of like float up into the sky and be available for people to just zip into like Star Trek. Beam me up. Okay, no, it doesn't. It's not working that way. All right, and it ended. There was an end to it, a clear ironclad end when all Israel was saved, which included the fullness of the nations, when all those who were Christ were raised at the last day, which was his coming, when all the elect were raised on the last day, when all the ones were sealed and saved, when the great multitude that came out from the great tribulation was standing in heaven celebrating, saying salvation belongs to our God. Folks, there was a clear end to this. So yeah, there was an end, okay? Now, I gotta just take a moment and stop and say something here. Now, obviously, I love my IO brethren, okay? We're in this together. We're martyrs for the truth, right? We're being persecuted all the day long. If the Christian delusional world hated you, don't worry, because it hated me first, all right? But, I got to say that some of you kind of kick against the goads, all right? Now, I have to call it like it is. You know me, I'm a straight shooter. A lot of you guys are awesome. You guys are spot on, okay? But there's some of you that are really kicking against the goads and are allowing these wannabes to make an argument as such. And that argument being that the new covenant still exists and people are coming into it today. But if you just let the story say what it says, for Christ's sake, all right? Like how I gave a shout out to Jesus there. If you just let it say what it says and you acknowledge the fact that there is no Israelites on earth after the coming of the Lord. Now, let me just say, the story is probably false, okay? I agree. It probably didn't happen. It's loaded with nonsense, okay? You can disagree with me all you want on that, but that's my position right now, okay? Talking snakes, talking donkeys, freaking people rising from the dead and going into Jerusalem and appearing to many, witnesses ascending up into the sky, a guy turning water into wine, walking on water, people rising from the dead, people healing the blind, lepers shit falling off, all kinds of stuff, feeding the 5,000, apostles walking around town healing people just by walking by them. I mean, so much stuff, right? Virgin birth, all this stuff. So you got a supernatural story like you wouldn't believe. It's supernatural stuff on steroids, really, but you deny this rapture idea, okay? Like, almost as if it's too much for you to handle or you don't want to go there. But that's ridiculous, all right? And by doing so, what you're allowing them to do is to say that, well, there's obviously a church or a body of individuals left on the earth in AD 70. Therefore, it shows that there's a continuation. Well, that goes bye-bye when they realize that they have no arguments against the rapture. All right, when they realize that Christ, the firstborn of the brethren, ascended up into the clouds and promised that they would ascend the same way. When they realized that those who were worthy to attain that age and that promise and that ascension would never die anymore, they'd be like angels in heaven, and they wouldn't marry or give in marriage anymore. Okay, they'd realize that that's impossible to argue, and they realized that Paul said that he would change their lowly mortal bodies to immortal, glorified, heavenly, angelic beings when they were caught up into the clouds with the dead ones together to be with the Lord, where they would never die and just be with him forever. Okay, that's the entire story. All right. Now, you might not like that, fellow IOer, and you may disagree for whatever reason, right? Maybe you have a tendency to want to keep this story as close to reality as possible. Maybe you don't want to give up the story completely yet, and that's fine. I get it. Even I'm holding out. Even I believe that there's a 2%, 3% chance that some of this stuff actually happened, right? I'm not holding out that it's not IO. That's obvious. But in terms of it being fiction or nonfiction, right? I'm heavily favoring the fiction, especially the New Testament, right? The Old Testament, there's a lot of stuff there, but the New Testament to me is just chock full of wacky stuff, and it just can't be. But you know, this final rapture, this catching up, this them finally seeing him, marveling at his coming, being like him, not being ashamed at his coming, being changed to the same he is, being, taking on his glorious image, being glorified, partaking in a resurrection like his. I mean, all these statements in the New Testament, folks, it's just chock full. All right, talk about evidence. All right. So just go where the text leads. All right. Don't kick against the goads, because you're giving these people a foothold, however lame it may be. All right. And if that is the case, and that is the ending, then the next time they tell you, oh, Israel was to be a light to the nations, and, and I'm speaking of full preterists, of course, because futurists just are clueless. They think that all this stuff's in the future. They don't even believe what Jesus said, right? But with a full preterist, when they say, oh, when Christ came, they were changed, and now they went out and started preaching the gospel, all you got to tell them is, dude, the story doesn't show that. The story shows that the church went bye-bye. The church was up in heaven celebrating, like Revelation 7 and 14 and everything shows. Right? The church was not on planet Earth, according to this miraculous supernatural story. So I had to say that, right? I had to get that out there, because I feel like that lack of defense on that point has really caused a lot of people to gain a foothold, however lame that may be. But when you tell them that, this is what the story says, they realize that they can't go anywhere with it. And it makes much more sense. It makes much more sense given the details of the story, right? Because if there wasn't a glorious catching up and a taking away into heaven with the rest of the dead ones, in terms of what the story says, I should say, then, it makes really no sense for there to be an end, right? To be an end for the Gentiles out in the nations and everything. It makes no sense. It makes no sense for Paul to tell them to live as though they weren't married because the time was short, those in Corinth, to not get attached to their possessions and all that. It makes no sense, right? So, and of course, it doesn't really cap off the story, right? The Savior was coming for them for salvation. He was going to save them, right? These are ones in the nations too, not just those in Judea, right? What were the ones in the nations being saved from? Well, they were being caught up together with the dead, where they would forever be with the Lord. And that's the end of the story. Happily ever after. So just keep that in mind. I know some of you are against that for whatever reason, God only knows, but it is the truth. All right? It is the truth as to what the story says, I should say. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this, let's go back on that point. So, the objection that these guys say, oh, well, foreigners could join Israel in the old covenant, therefore it's happening today, is just not valid, all right? Because, again, this was a mission. This was not a new religion. This was not a new covenant. In fact, the New Testament says who the new covenant was made with, doesn't it? It says it was going to be made with Jacob, Romans 11. Right? He will establish his new covenant with Jacob when all Israel was saved. Right? So that's the new covenant. And in Hebrews 8, even though it's kind of misunderstood and it's just kind of Paul quoting an old historical text of Israel, that also says who the new covenant was being made with: Jacob and Israel, the two houses. Judah and Israel, the two houses. So the new covenant isn't even said to be made with anybody but Israel in the New Testament, even if you look at it from that standpoint. So, so that point is completely stupid. All right, no Iower would ever deny that strangers could join Israel's old covenant, but that was just a very small side detail. That was not the thrust and the focus of the story, right? That's an add-on. That's a side dish. All right, that's like if you have a filet mignon, right, with a baked potato and salad and, carrots, asparagus, the whole nine, right? You got it sitting in front of you. It's looking real good. All right, that's the main focal point of your meal, right? And then all of a sudden they bring like a side of, bread. All right, they throw a couple warm buns on the side of it and you eat that too. That's like what a stranger is in this story. All right, it's a little side dish. It's not to be taken as the focal point by any means. Israel is the focal point, all right? And the other thing I wanted to talk about really briefly is how desperate some of these people are, where they have to actually look through the Bible to find like one or two passages that might be worded a little different. When we came from futurism to full preterism, we did so because of the overwhelming amount of scriptural proof, right? I mean, if you just look in the New Testament alone, there's over 100 time statements that are all imminent, at the door, at hand, before some of you die, this generation, the judge is at the door, all these things will take place shortly, soon, at hand, these are near, he's coming quickly. All these incredibly imminent time statements we couldn't overlook. If we did overlook them, we'd be dishonest, right? And that's why we all went to full preterism. But what's funny is that the full preterist likes to hammer that down on the futurist. I used to do it too. Okay, I always did this, right? Look at all these time statements. You're being dishonest. But it's funny how things work because, now what's happening is the Iower is coming out to all people, including the full preterists, and saying, hey, look at all these statements about Israel only. You're being dishonest. All right. And what does the desperate wannabe do in retaliation to that? Well, they go to the Bible and they, scour, they tirelessly rip through it and they look for a passage that is worded slightly different, right? Or might, say something that sort of seems suggestive that there's an ongoing mission, right? And they jump all over that and they say, look, I found it. There's one here that IO can't deal with, All the while, folks, totally ignoring, acting as if they don't even exist, the thousands of IO passages in the Bible. Thousands, okay? If anyone reads the Old Testament and thinks that this is a book about anyone other than Israel, they need their head examined, all right? On that basis alone, if anybody knows anything about the Old Testament and how Israel-centric it is, and Israel only it is, and God destroying people for Israel's sake, and God wiping out man, woman, and child for Israel's sake. I feel like I'm preaching now. And God telling the Israelites to rape young women for their pleasure. Young foreign women, okay? If you look at all these things and you come away with any other idea other than this God was Israel only, then you're a buffoon. All right? You are a buffoon. Okay? Or I should say this story is Israel only. All right? Now, based on that fact alone, when you come to a view like IO that says, hey, I really think that the Bible's Israel only. I think that the salvation in the end is Israel only. I think that Jesus only came for Israel. He said that. On that fact alone, people should automatically open up and allow themselves to hear what this view has to say, right? But instead, what do? They clam up, they get mad, they say no chance, they ignore that the Old Testament's 100% about Israel, they ignore that the New Testament is all about Israel as well, and they ignore that Jesus said he came only for Israel. And they say, nope, can't be. Look, I found one passage here in the middle of the Gospels. This is it. This is what gives us hope. It's really dumb. It is absolute, pathetic, desperate, and dumb. PDD, baby. All right? So, don't be one of those wannabe idiots. All right? Don't ignore the mountains of scriptural proof. In the New Testament alone, I could put forth 500, probably 1,000 scriptural proofs that prove IO to your 2 or 3 that you think are difficult for IOers. Now, just like any view, nobody has it all figured out. Okay, I'll admit that. Right? There's some passages that are a little bit troublesome in the way that they're worded. Okay? And these are not passages that are like overwhelmingly troublesome. It's just like, the translation probably got that one a little bit wrong. It's sort of worded a little bit differently. It doesn't really jive with certain things. But when you look at the preponderance of evidence, folks, the overwhelming evidence for the other side, there's no chance, right? There is no chance that this 1, 2, maybe 3 verses, and I don't have any. I'm just using this as an example because I really don't think there are any. But sometimes when like you come across somebody like, for instance, someone said Matthew 22, the parable of the wedding feast, has a different order in Matthew 22 than it does in like Luke, in Luke's account and Matthew's other account. But there's like 3 or 4 parables of this wedding feast, and 3 out of the 4 show that the door was shut, it ended, the gospel went out, the door was closed, nobody else could come in. But then there's this one that kind of like says that the destruction of the city would come first, and then the news would go out to the highways and byways. But like the Bible does sometimes it words things a little different. Sometimes it could be looking at one thought and then just change to another thought. Who really knows, right? But that one single portion, which I've explained away a million times, by the way, does not negate and do away with all the other portions. It does not defeat the other parables of the wedding feast that all show a conclusion, right? It doesn't defeat Paul saying that the gospel would go to all the nations, fullness of the nations, and then all Israel would be saved. It does not defeat Jesus saying this gospel will go to all nations and then the end will come. It does not defeat Jesus saying he came only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It does not defeat Paul saying he was born into the law to redeem those under the law. It does not defeat the fact that he's the end of the law to those who believe. It does not defeat the fact that Hebrews says he was born to die and his death and his blood was for sins committed under the old covenant. Right? It doesn't defeat any of this stuff. I could go on for days. So don't be dumb. All right? In a court of law, in a trial, they'll look at the full body of evidence. All right? And they'll go with whatever has the better evidence. It's not even close when it comes to Israel only. It's not even close. Okay, picture Mount Everest on one side and an anthill on the other. That's the proof for the 2 views. And Mount Everest, of course, being IO. So, I just wanted to say a few of those things. I feel a little fired up on this Freaky Friday. And that's about all I got for now, folks. I hope you all have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend. Got some things lined up coming down the pike. Who knows, what I'm going to talk about. There's a lot I could talk about. I can talk forever. But anyways, if you liked it, damn, this damn voice of mine gets caught up sometimes. But if you liked the audio, if you enjoyed it, take that little peg that you have on the end of your hand. It's got a little nail on the end of it. Looks like a short stump. And just touch that little thumbs up button on your screen. Give it a little like-a-roo. Just a little tap, and I'll be very appreciative. I hope you all have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you on that flip side. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.